Hi everybody, so we're just going to take it up from last time, a little overlap, because we're going to look at this very soon. This browser on the left hand side of the sampler is where you load files into your instrument, so we'll look at that in a minute. First we'll go through some interface elements so that you can see those, and then we'll demonstrate the whole lot inside the software. So I have this little sample library. If I just drag that in, like grip it and drag it, it'll create the virtual sampler in the rack, and it'll look like this. So it's easy enough, it's very intuitive, and you get this little panel. So we'll go through the elements of that next. This can be shrunk down into a very slender thing. Now normally it doesn't appear this way, but just so in case it does happen, if you press the little plus sign, it'll expand it down into what it normally looks like, and then if you want to return it to the slim version, you can press the minus button. Now it normally appears as the one in the middle, so just in case you accidentally toggle it, that's how you get it back. There's a little display, and this has got some really useful stuff in there and some useful kind of menus and features you need to know about. So you can browse through instruments using the arrows, and that's kind of very useful. So especially with the preset libraries and any of the factory instruments, if you want to like scroll through the different versions of, say, a horn ensemble or a guitar group ensemble or something like that, there's sometimes different versions of them, you know, like some of them might have, like there might be a regular piano, a honky-tonk piano, that type of thing, and you can skip through the presets without having to reload them each time. You can just use those forward and back arrows to get through the various instruments that are in the folder. There's a solo button, which normally you don't use unless you're doubling up instruments within the same rack, and then you can listen to each one individually, but normally you don't usually need to use that so much when you're working the way we work in Logic. The mute button is quite useful if you want to turn off an instrument just to hear what's going on with some of the other instruments, but once again, tend not to use that often, because we're working in Logic and we with one instrument per track, so we can use the mute button on the Logic channel. But it's good to know they're there. The other ones are actually much more useful. So tune, pan, and volume can be used to, like pan things from left to right, set the volume. And there are also VU meters. The VU meters are good. They let you know if the instrument is clipping or going into the red. But also, I find with a lot of contact instruments, I have to turn them up quite a bit. And the volume knob, I usually kind of push it up quite a bit. You can also delete the instrument if you've edited an instrument and you've just decided that you're not getting anywhere with it. Then you can just hit X and it will get rid of it. There's also an aux panel, but we'll get to that later. I don't want to talk about that today so much. But it does, if you hit aux, it drops down a little aux panel. And this is for sending auxiliary effects within the contact instrument itself. But once again, we're going to be probably layering our effects out at the DAW level in the Logic mixer itself. So maybe it's useful if you want an individual effect on an individual sample. That can be useful. This is very important. The MIDI channel assignment. So once you're plugged into any particular system and you have like a MIDI device set up, it'll show up here. Now, this screen grab I've given you here, it simply shows you port A from host, and then you see port B, C, and D are showing as not available. And that's because when I took this screen grab, I didn't have an external MIDI device plugged into the instrument. All I had was the MIDI keyboard routed through Logic, and Logic is the host. So Contact is like the virtual instrument and Logic is the host that it's sitting in. So those MIDI channels are coming from Logic, and that's the way Contact sees it when you use it as either an audio unit or a VST inside a DAW. Very, very useful too is up on the top left, the MIDI activity meter. That tells you if MIDI is actually coming into the instrument. So if nothing's playing and if that's not flickering, then you'll probably know that's the reason, that the MIDI isn't making it into the instrument for some reason, and then you need to go and figure out how to do it. We will probably only be using MIDI from the host in this module, but if you take this a little bit further down the line and you incorporate external hardware, instruments, or units from a studio into Contact, then those port B, C, and Ds will show the various devices that you have connected to your computer, and then you'll be able to route them into Contact as well. So it's worth knowing about them, and that's that down arrow there, adjacent to the MIDI channel that's highlighted there. That is the toggle that displays all of the MIDI channels. Normally you end up setting it to port A from host, MIDI channel 1, and that usually works. You can also set it to Omni, and if you set it to Omni, it'll receive any MIDI channel. So a little more about that later on, but for now, either set it to MIDI port A from host 1, which I think it defaults to when it opens anyway. And if that's not working, you can try Omni. And if that's not working, check the MIDI activity meter to see if it's flickering. We will soon be looking at edit mode, and this looks a little intimidating, but it's kind of like there's a few sections to it. We'll be going through the various sections. Some of the sections we'll be using. Some of the sections will describe what they do, but we probably won't be using them. And there's an awful lot in Contact. It's a very, very powerful sampler. So what you'll find inside the edit window when you press the edit mode button, which is that button that looks like a spanner up at the top left, you'll see the group, mapping, wave, and script editors. So these are the editors within Contact. And then up at the top there you see buttons where it says the 4 names that we just said. There's another one called instrument options, but you don't need to touch that actually. I would leave that alone. So in this you get access to editable parameters, modules, and effects as well. But mostly we'll be dealing with the mapping editor, making adjustments in there. There's the wave editor where you can edit the sample that you're playing, do looping, things like that. And then there's like some effects and modulation panels as well, and those are very useful and indispensable actually. 2 power tips that you'll be very glad that you watched this video to get, because you actually have to dig through the manual to find these. So the first one is fine tuning. So if you want to fine tune any knob or slider, then hold down the shift key while you click your mouse, and it will then tune in very fine increments. So for example, if you just put your mouse on the tune knob and move it up and down, it'll move up and down in half steps. It's quite a coarse kind of tuning, but it kind of makes sense. You want to transpose it up a step, you click it twice, slide it up two notches, and it goes up 2 half steps to a whole step, and then you've transposed it up a whole step. But if you wanted to tune, like say one of you're in an ensemble and somebody's a little out of tune and you want to tune your synthesizer to them, then you can hold down the shift key while you actuate the tuning knob, and it will actually tune in cents. So we'll tune very fine variations, shadings of the tuning, and you can get a very, very precise tuning with that knob. I got to say, the tuning in Contact is second to none. It's really, really great. You don't really need fine tuning so much on the pan or on the volume. Those usually you just slide them. But sometimes if you want to return everything to default. So if you fine-tune something, sometimes it can be kind of difficult to get it back to zero, to get it back to that center tuning. If you hold down the command button and click on any control, it resets it to default. So there are loads of shortcuts in Kontakt, but these two in particular are incredibly important. So write them on a post-it, write them on your hand, on the back of your phone, somewhere, wherever you keep notes and life hacks. You should put those because they're very, very important. And the last bit in this section, I'm just going to show you a picture of what's called the key map. And the key map is the range of keys that a sample is mapped to. So in this case, we've actually mapped one sample, one piece of audio, but mapped it over 2 octaves from C2 to C4. And you can see that this amber kind of see-through kind of layout that shows you where the sample is mapped. If you click, if you deselect that, it actually turns into a blue aqua kind of color, which we'll look at now in a second. What's called the root key, which is the original pitch of the sample, is always denoted by the yellow key on the keyboard below the key map. And up on top of the key map, you can actually see it says the root is C3, and then there are other kind of parameters there. It says keyboard range C2 to C4. So there's information up there as well. And in Kontakt, the mapping of a single sample is called a zone. So there is actually a hierarchy of how things are set up in Kontakt. And it starts with the sample as the kind of elemental unit. And then the next step up from that is the zone. There are other kind of structures in this hierarchy, and we'll be talking about those soon. So I have included one slide of definitions here, and that's more for your own reference. I will just sort of say that all of these things we talk about, like Core Audio and Apple, there's ASIO on Windows, developed by Steinberg. There's audio units by Apple. There's the VST, which we talked about before. There's also the VST3, which is the one that you should be using these days if you're on Reaper, for example. These are all what are called drivers, and those are proprietary pieces of software that facilitate fast, glitch-free streaming of audio between software programs and between software and hardware. I'll go over to the DAW now in the second video. So this concludes this portion, which is the slides.